lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Hello, horror hounds, and welcome to Now Slaying, an It Slays podcast production where we break down the latest and greatest in the world of horror. I'm your not-so-humble host, Colton.
I'm Rowan.
And today on the show, we are back with another double feature, covering the sequel to 2022's breakout horror sensation with Smile 2 and A24's latest offering starring Hugh Grant and a blueberry pie-scented candle with Heretic. So if you only want to hear us talk about one film and not the other, or are trying to avoid spoilers, be sure to use the podcast chapters and navigate our discussion. Now, Rowan, we've both been busy. We're a few weeks late covering Smile 2.
I'm like, what is this show? Who is this guy? What's going on?
Yeah, for real. Yeah, it's been a minute. Now, I want to know, are we late recording our episode for Smile 2 because you're not a big fan of the first film, or you simply weren't looking forward to the sequel, or what exactly is going on here?
You know, I think I say it every week now. I'm just like, dad life kicking me in the ass right now. But I will say, as of late, my local theater getting things, which is like not the normal. Normally I've got, normally me seeing a movie to review with you on Now Slaying is like a 3-hour venture to travel and come back. And
yeah, it's like an hour drive each way, and then you actually have to watch the movie, right?
Yeah. So, pretty good. Smile 2, I think just left my theater this week.
Okay, so did you manage to catch it just before it left? Or?
I did.
Nice. Okay.
I went and saw it, and then the next day I'm looking for our second feature, Heretic, there, and I'm like, oh, Smile 2, gone. I saw it the last night, apparently.
Wow.
In terms of the first one, I mean, obviously the first one you and me went to, almost having to get in fistfights with drunken Newfoundlanders that just won't shut up during movies.
Of course. The classic.
You just so tired that I was pretty sure you were asleep probably like half of it, or were about to
certainly
be.
Possible.
Yeah. But I remember coming out of it, and I remember us both kind of being like, you know what, it wasn't that bad. And obviously I think we said for the first one, it kind of wore its influences on its sleeve. This one, I'm sure we're going to talk about maybe even more. So, I was intrigued because what I should have done, obviously, revisited the first one before I saw this. Did I do that? No, I did not. So
neither did I.
Perfect. So yeah, going into it, I just was like, I can't even really remember how much I liked the first one or anything. Let's just see what happens. And I'm sure we'll talk about it. What about you? Big fan of the first one?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat where I thought the first one was simply okay. I was shocked when people were giving it oh, it's one of the best horror movies of the year, or it's the scariest thing I've seen all year. To be fair, the first one does have a couple of good jump scares in it, or at least kind of some body horror stuff that subverts your expectations, especially in the third act. Or I remember a smiling person running out of the house and then their head rotates, when someone's in the passenger window or something. That I remember it kind of caught me off guard, but it also was just kind of your usual horror fare is what I found for the most part. But, better than something that Blumhouse is doing, and not quite as challenging as an A24 movie. It was just kind of okay, it was all right. I enjoyed it, didn't hate it. And with this one coming out, honestly, I can't even remember really seeing the trailers in theaters and whatnot. I know obviously they had a marketing push around it, and I know the whole kind of reason this movie got made was basically the financial success of the first one, but also that it had a really strong pitch, being that it takes place in this pop music world. So I was like, okay, I can kind of see how that works, but also, not a huge fan of the first one. And then this thing came out and it was just universal praise. Everyone was oh, it's, it's a lot better than the first one. You got to go see it. It's so scary. They're oh, if they, honored horror performances, Naomi Scott would be up there. It was the sort of thing where everyone was singing this praises. And I was away for work, so I couldn't check it out. It was oh, okay, everyone's freaking out about this movie, and it's gonna be weeks before I see it. So yeah, I was definitely anticipating it, and it was one of the first things I saw as soon as I got back in Newfoundland and could actually go to a theater. So yeah, it was something I was definitely looking forward to in the end, but mostly just due to the, the groundswell of excitement around the movie as it finally hit theaters. So were we smiling when we left the theater? Well, before we get into that, let's throw it on over to the trailer.
I keep seeing this face everywhere.
I've been tracking this thing. It spreads from person to person. Nobody has survived longer than a week.
How do we stop it?
Smile 2, rated R.
What you just heard is from Smile 2, written and directed by Parker Finn, and the story is as follows. As the date of her comeback world tour draws near, global pop sensation Sky Riley begins experiencing increasingly terrifying and inexplicable events. Overwhelmed by the escalating horrors and the pressures of fame, Sky is forced to face her past and peel back the layers of the smiling entity that seems to be haunting her. Now, here on Now Slang, we like to keep things relatively spoiler-free up front before moving into the more in-depth, spoiler-filled discussion. So, Rowan, what are your spoiler-free thoughts on Smile 2?
So I was going to keep this till like towards the end of the spoiler free section, but I'll just put it up front. Rowan Fraser, there's many times I jumped like a little bitch in this.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, I don't know if that's really to say it's like scary necessarily, but the jump scares were effective on me, which usually aren't like jump scares, especially in like kind of, this popcorn horror genre.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like the infamous, clap of The Conjuring, things like that. Like,
of course.
These things always happen. I'm always like, this is stupid. It really brought to my mind going to see Insidious, The Red Door with Exilia, which I made fun of profusely for Exilia just keeping on jumping at the jump scares. And I told her, I said, if you had came with me when I saw this, I would never hear the end of it, because I just, not only that, guys, but like I said, this was the last night in my theater. There was people there. Like, there was quite a few people there.
Oh, wow. All
so
right.
Smile 2, making money,
nice.
Hand over fist. So not only am I jumping, I'm embarrassedly jumping while there's people in front of me, there's people in back of me. I'm trying to look tough, but it's not really happening. Now, like I said, I'm not saying that dictates how great the movie is, but yeah, I thought like some pretty like cool, effective jump scares in this.
I'm with you. I thought it had some good scares and at least some, what we would call unnerving sequences throughout the movie.
Yes.
It was very effective, I thought, in like bringing you into the mind of the main character and then, playing up the horror from that angle.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously when I saw this, the first thing I did, I was like, are they going to mention anywhere in the beginning? I don't see M. Night's name written anywhere on this one. I don't know what's going on. Obviously, we're just in our like Taylor Swift Eras Tour era of movies.
Obviously you're referencing Trap, and of course it's the other like pop music horror movie that came out this year and in my opinion was far less successful in kind of delving into this pop music superstardom world that is pretty interesting to set a horror movie in.
And I think I'm interested to see like what else we get in this kind of genre. This is 2 movies this year. I mean, obviously, like I said, we're in this era of like these giant Taylor Swift tours and Sabrina Carpenter, and so I'm interested to see like the influence of that on this. But I mean, I'm gonna say like overall, like I thought this was way more competent than I thought it had any right to be. The cinematography I thought was great on it. Like, I'm sure we're going to talk about, like, the specifics and stuff, but, like, generally, like, the opening shot really threw me off.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That I was like, what is going on here? And just, like, overall, just looked really good. Like, this looked like something I would expect to, go see, like, an A24, like, seasoned director for, like, oh, I know this is going to look good, whatever. I'm almost kind of sad that I'm like, maybe A24 needs to try to pry this guy away and give him like...
Let's not do Smile 3. Let's
Smile
do,
3, the A24.
A slow burn deliberation on grief instead. Let's do that.
I do got to say, though, like, another strong thing I found, which I remembered I enjoyed, but I did kind of complain about with the first one was I really like the score in this. And now I remember in the first one, me kind of, saying to you and when we talked about it on the episode was like, this score sounds like Disaster Piece.
Yeah.
And I looked it up because I thought maybe it was when we did the first one. I was like, this is the influence of It Follows, very obviously, and especially with the music. But I thought they really grew the score out in this one where, I was like, I'd buy a vinyl, the score of this one. I was like, it's really good. Like,
yeah.
Yet again, another part of this that is way better than it needed to be.
Yeah, that was kind of like my thoughts on it overall as well. Like, you've touched on basically all my notes, but the main thing right off the bat was that this was way more competent stylistically than the first movie. I was just shocked. Like, the movie opens up on a long oneer that has, practical effects and, shootouts, and it's, going through windows and all this stuff. It's a very, very complicated sequence that's opening up the movie, and it's probably 8 to 10 minutes long. And I was just like, damn, dude, like you're really like showing off in the beginning of the movie. But also it doesn't really stop there. There's so many like seamless transitions and match cuts and kind of zooming into one shot to then transition to another one on a completely different setting and different time period. It's just very engrossing cinema when I was watching it. Like, I very much felt like I was kind of spiraling down this rabbit hole because it was just like it was always sucking you into like the movie at the time, right? When I was just like, okay, obviously we're there in her mental, we're there watching this deterioration of her mental state, but also like the movie is kind of like trapping you and bringing you along as well. It's just, it doesn't really give you a moment to breathe a lot of the time. Not necessarily in like that it's like a breakneck pace in terms of like scares and all that, but in terms of just like, it's always moving things along in this really competent way that I was just constantly impressed. Similarly, like I had a note on the score as well. I thought kind of incorporating like these pop music aspects and like that the music, her songs and whatnot actually seemed half decent, and the choreography behind them and seeing like the practice and that taking the toll on her body and her mental health and all that stuff. I thought it was far more successful than Trap at kind of setting a horror movie in this pop music world that I thought was just, absolutely like fun to watch. And Naomi Scott, she was just, I think she's amazing in this movie. I know everyone was like, oh, Oscars sort of thing. And, Smile 2 isn't getting nominated for an Oscar. But the performance in this movie, it is one of those roles that essentially she's pretty much, in every scene of the movie from, after the cold open until the end of the movie, right? It's very much a movie that kind of lives and dies on her performance. And she's asked to do a lot of kind of crazy things physically with obviously being a pop star. But also there's a lot of nuance and a lot of mental like interiority to this performance that like she really has to sell you on. And I thought she was great. I thought it was a great character study. I loved kind of having the backstory, her tragic backstory, the trauma from a year before essentially killing her pop career. And now we're like watching as she's kind of mounting her comeback tour, and just basically this like most stressful week of her life also happens to be, one of the worst weeks of her lives, of course, because of the anniversary of everything that happened a year ago, but also like having this entity like plague you as you're trying to, mount this return. I just thought it was a really neat concept that I really liked. And it was the sort of thing that I was just like, I completely understand how this instantly like sold the sequel, like when he pitched it.
Yeah.
It was the sort of thing that as soon as I started watching it after like 15 minutes or so, I was like, oh yeah, this got the juice. This is going places. Yeah, I've been rambling. I don't know if there's something else you want to throw in.
I mean, yeah, no, I 100% agree. Naomi Scott, like, super amazing in this. I thought, like, a lot of the other kind of, other side performances, like Rosemary DeWitt that plays the mother, like, I really enjoyed her. Everyone just kind of played the role perfectly, how you'd want it done in this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll get into it more. I will say that, I thought there was parts where it kind of happens with all this kind of stuff that it gets shaky the more we get into the lore.
Yeah, I agree.
And, I think the problem is it kind of made me feel like maybe he didn't necessarily, when he had the first one, have the lore kind of all mapped out already.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I do feel some of the stuff we're kind of playing fast and loose. It needs to fit what he wants to do.
Yeah, there's kind of a part in this movie where you're transitioning to the third act where it starts to feel a little bit like a Final Destination or The Ring or, the third act of It Follows, where it's like you're basically coming up with this like outlandish plan to try and defeat the entity. And it's almost like, it's just like too silly. It's like, okay, like whatever, who cares about this shit? None of us are here for this. And, even in It Follows, which I love, that's a certain section of the movie I'm not a huge fan of. Now, this one, I think it does some, there's some interesting like tweaks and like some subversions of that in that whole sequence that we'll get into in the spoiler discussion. But I do agree that it was, it didn't seem like something that was all completely figured out, from the first movie leading to the second, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, that just goes to show you, like, how competent I think the movie is, because I think even with that, like, it holds up pretty well still. Just that foundation of, just how this movie's making you feel is so strong that you can kind of just look past those things and you're like, all right, cool. Like, even if this seems kind of shaky visually, like I'm interested. I don't really care. So, I think that works out very well.
Yeah, it's kind of like as they try and kind of make some sense of logic or rules to this world when you're dealing with like this unknown entity or like this mental unraveling of a character where like you can't really trust what they're seeing and what they're thinking for so much of the movie. It's kind of like, I don't know if we really need like a tidy explanation as to why this is happening or like, finishing it all up with a bow. It was the sort of thing where it's like, of course, I was rolling my eyes at some of the things they were suggesting, but it was also like, I'm in this ride along with Sky Riley, like the character, that it's just like, yeah, I'm going to watch and see what happens regardless. Kind of mentioning that, I do want to say, like, I think the ending is super predictable. I think probably everybody who, even hears the pitch of this movie knows how this movie's going to end. It's a good ending, but it's, it's super predictable. I do think the movie's a little long still. It's the sort of thing where, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it. I think it's, it's good, but it's the sort of thing that if you shaved maybe like 15 minutes out of this, I think it'd be a little bit stronger. There are definitely some ebbs and flows, specifically in the second act, as we're trying to kind of make our way towards like, how is this movie going to wrap up? That I found myself not like looking at my watch or checking my phone or anything, but kind of feeling like, okay, there's a bit of a lull here now. Like, let's keep things going. And there's what I got written as an overuse of a scary vocal effect. That, it's just like the evil voice, sort of. I found that was always corny when it was used in the movie. It was the sort of thing where I was like, that's not remotely scary. And I think just actually hearing like the characters' voices speaking or like kind of like strained vocals would be more effective than just like the deep, evil demon voice that, Blumhouse has probably been using for 20 years. It's not doing anything for me.
Blumhouse just catching strays.
I'm sorry, I'm just shitting all over them this episode. I don't know. They're they have some good stuff every now and then, but they are an easy one to just fire upon. And then I guess the last little thing I want to say is that this movie is still quite bleak. It's interesting when I'm watching it. There is almost like a mean-spiritedness to the movie that makes it kind of fun to watch, but it also is like, oh, this is like a little bit more disturbing. Like basically, like conceptually, the idea is just you are watching someone get broken down mentally and physically so much over the course of a week that they, want to take their own life, that it's I'm saying this as I'm kind of like joking or like I got this happiness in my voice, but it is like something when you're watching it, it is a little bit like traumatizing sometimes, or like I can understand how it could be a bit much for some people. When I was watching it, it was just something that I was like, man, this is bleak. This is going places. And like, don't get me wrong. Obviously, when you see like the 7 days culminate for certain characters, it always is in like this crazy, spectacular fashion that's just insane. But it's the sort of thing where it's like, yeah, I can understand how this subject matter might be a little bit upsetting to some people. That when I was watching it, I was like, oh yeah, it still has kind of like that core of mean-spiritedness coming through it a little bit, like coursing through it, just because of the concept more than anything. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely recommend you check this one out. I think, we're probably a month out now from when this was released. I think it's actually coming to streaming later this week, if I'm not mistaken. So if you haven't checked it out already, you'll have another chance to do so next weekend, I believe. What about you, Rowan? Would you recommend people check this one out?
Yeah, I would highly recommend checking this one out. Like you said, yeah, obviously I think this is starting to leave the theaters, but I think home theater, whatever, you'll have a good time watching this, and I would recommend checking it out the minute it comes to streaming.
So yeah, we're both recommending this one, and with that, I think it's time to cut to our spoiler discussion for Smile 2. We are now in our spoiler discussion for Smile 2, so if you've not seen Smile 2, it's time to tune out and come back once you've seen the movie, or keep listening if you simply don't care. Rowan, anything you want to kick things off with? I mean, we were kind of dancing around the opening shot.
That's, why not start at the beginning?
Let's do it.
So sitting in the theater, it comes on. Not gonna lie, I had to do the quick take because I'm like, am I in the right movie? Like, what, what's going on here? I was like, this seems like I'm in like John Wick or something, or like some sort of heist movie. But obviously they do this, shot that I think will be one of the famous scenes in this franchise of almost this like crime movie. It's like all done to look like a one shot. I don't know if it's actually a one shot or not.
I'm not sure either. If it isn't, then they did a good job of
did a fantastic job.
Sure. Yeah.
And, the more once I'm like, yeah, I am in the right theater. This is the right movie. I was like giddy with it because I was like, this is awesome. Because I was like, I love when a movie does this, where to me, it's like you don't see kind of this like crime element or feel in a horror movie. And I was like, this is
very rare.
Very rare. And this is going to be a weird over there comparison. But this is why I think I did on the show, bragged up how much I love the Purge TV show.
Okay.
Was because it was a horror show, but it had nothing to do with like anything about the movies. It was all about like the bureaucracy of the Purge and minimum wage government workers and stuff.
Yeah.
And I just love, I love when things do that, where it's like we intertwine different kinds of movies into our horror movie. And I just thought it was so good. It was so competent. It looked so good.
Yeah.
It's like very fast-paced action.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because the person we're following in this, Kyle Gallner, obviously he's at the end of the first movie, and this movie literally takes place, it says, I think 6 days later.
Yeah.
And, you're left to be like, okay, I vaguely remember the first movie. There was that The Ring 7 days sort of thing in it. So I'm, you're trying to figure it out. But it's almost like instantly, it's like off to the left-hand side, you see like a burning person for a second as he's walking across a lawn, and it's not acknowledged at all. And I was kind of the same as you, where I was like, what was that? I was like, did someone burn themselves in the first movie? I literally couldn't remember. And then I was just watching it, and you're seeing Kyle Gallner, who's known for always playing these kind of like sleazy crime characters and like little indie dramas. Like he was just in Strange Darling earlier this year. And I always see him pop up in movies for like usually a couple of scenes if it's a larger movie, and then if it's a little indie drama that they made for like $1 million, he'll be like the main character, and he's always excellent. So seeing him in this, like, kind of sell this idea of going into like a trap house, just trying to, buy some drugs, trying to score, but also trying to murder himself in front of these, or kill himself in front of these people to pass on the curse to like, what he kind of deems as the people, that are, they deserve to die is kind of like the vibe I got from him. That's what he was trying to do, trying to make, his suicide to kind of mean something, I guess. I was like, oh, this is a really interesting way to start the movie. And then, of course, it like has these long dialogue sequences back and forth. It erupts into a shootout. There's people trying to break into the house. He's going through the window, and he's running away, and I'm just watching it, and I'm like glued to the screen. And then he just gets nailed by like a truck. And I was just like, holy shit, what is the beginning of this movie? And then, of course, you get like the big crane shot where it comes up in the air and you see like almost the blood smatter on the ground is like making a smile. And I was just like, oh my God, this goofy ass movie. We're in for a ride here now. I was just completely sold on kind of like the vibe and what they were going for right off the bat. And, so elated to see kind of like this crime concept used in a horror movie, which, more recently on the show when we did Don't Breathe, I think I kind of mentioned that as well. But yeah, I very much like kind of setting horror within also like a crime story. And, this is only for a couple minutes, but it was very successful.
Yeah, well, to me, this was the audition. This was him saying, hey, A24, I'm here. get at me. Yeah. I've got other ideas. But yeah, I mean, and I thought it was a very clever way because obviously we don't realize till like later in the story that how this connects to like Lewis, and Lewis is the guy that's there that we don't really is no name to us at the time of the opening. Yeah. Like I love when movies do that where I've watched this whole scene, and then I don't know that I'm actually already getting into this like other story, just like with a back door. Yeah, and then I mean it's really I'm like, do I really want to get into it now? It's really hard for me not to go like directly to what is like I think I'm just like hands down. I was like, yup. Like, this movie is good for me.
I mean, go for it. I mean, all I got is a couple of, like, kills and then, all third act discussion stuff.
So the apartment stuff was, to me, like, really strong. Like, super...
Lewis's apartment or, like, her in her own apartment?
Both. I really like her in her apartment.
Yeah.
The Lewis stuff also, super amazing. Like I said, we said we didn't watch we should have watched the first one before this. I don't remember the first one being like overly this graphic. Speaking of Lewis's apartment, like I remember, like you said, the head turn and stuff like that, but like I don't remember it being necessarily like gory. It was more just like bodies doing weird things.
Yeah.
Where Lewis's apartment is just like, we keep having
it's horrific.
We keep having the joke on the podcast about people slamming their heads into things.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
they subvert it because he doesn't slam his face into like, a table or like a ledge. Instead, he slams a plate, one of the weightlifting plates up against his own face over and over again. I was like, okay, all right, we're tweaking this a little bit. But I thought it was really effective too, and like the gore and like the effects on it, like as his face gets cratered essentially, and the smile peeking out through it, and the squelching noise, the sound effect that comes back like throughout the movie, kind of almost as like a signifier of like PTSD from that event. I thought was very effective. And then obviously there's also this kind of pull of like the main character not really being a great person, deciding like, well, I'm not going to call this in, or I'm not going to do anything, because it would go really poorly for me if I was in, a drug dealer's apartment when this guy died, right? It's like, why else would you be there, when she's trying to mount the story of like that she's clean and, that she did rehab and all this stuff, that I was like, good, we have a complicated kind of narcissistic main character here, that I like. That it's like, you don't have to like your main characters. They have to be interesting. And, I think there's a lot to like about this character regardless, but it's still like, I was just like, yes, good. Let's go here. Like, let's make it a little ballsy. And I thought Lewis's apartment was very good. But yes, we derailed it. You wanted to talk more so about her apartment as well. Yeah.
Which, I think a lot of the scares and like a lot of the effective stuff, and I think the interesting stuff, they kind of use this apartment. Obviously, we're dealing with a celebrity, so she can't go out and about and all that kind of stuff. But like, we get the, I really like when her friend comes over. Is it Gemma, I think? I believe.
Yeah, Gemma's her name. Yeah.
Gemma comes over. And then, I love the fact, like, when she wakes up in bed and then, Gemma's doing the smile and then this movie does, what I think works really well of it. Then it's like, kind of like, oh, wait a second. Like, was Gemma just not here the entire time or, cause we also have, like you said, we also have this like unreliable narrator. Like she's like a recovering drug addict. We know, she's, is taking like some pills for this back injury. I know that's rough on you to reflect back on this. I was curious if that's where you get your medication from.
Yeah, I guess the listeners don't know that I've been off work for basically the past week because I got a lower back injury. But no, I'm not going to Lewis's apartment to score Vicodin. I just went to the walk-in clinic out in the Goulds, which might be just as sketchy and scary in some ways as Lewis's apartment.
I was going to say you might pick up something worse than the entity there. So
absolutely, it's certainly possible. but yeah, I guess I relate to lingering around your house and not being able to leave as of right now, for sure.
But yeah, like I thought that was really good. And then obviously later on we use it for kind of this crazed fan who I thought they did, at least had me just like, what? I don't know. Because obviously we have a scene where she's signing autographs. And they kind of use this to, play with her paranoia.
I like this idea a lot, yeah.
Where, we get this guy that, he's like rashes and bumps and like, he almost looks like, a movie would depict like, like a drug addict or something, like a severe.
To me, it was almost even more extreme. It looked like he had like leprosy or something.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh shit, yeah, this guy. And then, but of course, then we get the kids smiling and then we're like, oh, wait a second, like, that guy got dragged off by security, so, everybody saw him, and... Yeah,
what about this little girl? Like, you're trying to figure out, like, who is real, who is the entity. Obviously, celebrities probably have lots of interactions with super fans or fans that are just awkward or like they freeze up. So it was the sort of thing for me that I was a little bit like empathetic to the situation, but I also just liked it as a conceit for like, selling this horror premise. And of course, like the payoff being that she goes back to her apartment one night and finds like men's clothing kind of strewn about this hallway with this naked smiling man at the end of the hallway in the dark. I was just like, oh yeah, this is some good stuff. This is like top tier horror.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's just like yet again is why this really works for this premise is just because like there's so many people that she interacts with day to day that she doesn't really know or have a connection with, or so it's just like. I couldn't imagine all these people. But obviously, to me, I thought the standout of the entire movie was the background dancers.
Yeah, like the flash dance mob or the freeze dance, whatever it was. Yeah.
Which was like, this didn't jump scare me at all, but like, it was just so weird.
I agree. It's a swing that you're like, okay, this is a little bit funny in a certain way, because you're seeing like, half a dozen people or even a dozen people like all on top of each other, like filling every crevice of like a hallway, kind of like merging as one unit, and it's like coming towards her. And it could be a little bit silly and a little bit cheesy and a little bit hokey. But once again, it's like the performance, it's the music, it's everything kind of coming together that it sells you on the, on the whole sequence. And I was like, man, that's a awesome sequence. If you can be fully engrossed in the world of the movie and not just laugh at everything that might be a little uncomfortable, like some people do with horror movies.
Yeah, I mean, and then even when they're kind of like stop dancing, we just kind of get this paranoia of them like pushing and pulling and grabbing her. Because of course, at the same time, I'm trying to figure out like, oh, are they gonna like, is this it? Or are they gonna like try to like seriously like kill her or something now already or something? And just like the paranoia of it all, like it was shot so well. It really was giving me like Mother Darren Aronofsky vibes going on, where everything's chaotic, you're being pulled, you don't know what's going on.
Yeah, some of the way like the bodies kind of like merged together and like kind of created like shapes and whatnot reminded me of Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. Some of the dance stuff in that with like the ribbons and stuff, like almost like
I love that
the
movie
human form being like a mass.
Yeah, loved it.
Oh,
I still haven't watched it.
You still haven't watched it, yeah.
Someday.
Well,
I
okay, well, when you watch it, you'll be like, oh, I love this part. It's similar to Smile, too.
Literally still have it out from when you guys did the episode. Just
very good. But yeah, I like how that sequence kind of culminates, if I'm not mistaken, in like one of them like reaching its hand, right? Like like deep down her throat. And of course, like what kind of sparks this sequence is her taking Vicodin in the bathroom and kind of like breaking the mirror and all that stuff and kind of having this breakdown. And once again, it's this part of the movie where it's blurring the lines between what's real, what's fiction, what's, all in her head, what is like an entity or a paranormal activity event. And it's just really effective. I just liked how it was kind of brought back to like possibly her overdosing, because I think right after that sequence she is in rehab again, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, it's hard because like I said, I always feel like we want to talk about all these great scenes, all this stuff, but like even just like one after another, I thought the rehab was really good, with the mom, which like I thought was really effective. Yeah. Like I knew there was going to be something going on like obviously a movie like this, you're always like, okay, like, we've got someone very familiar in the room. When's this going to turn? And yeah, like I thought this was just like, this is where like the true like terror kind of sets in, where she ends up, murdering her mother, because obviously the entity, makes her see stuff, which is why this entity is just great for a movie, because it's like, obviously the entity can project things on someone that's standing there, and, you're not in that reality at that time.
Yeah, and this is also like the part of the movie where it starts to go pretty far off the rails, and you're not sure how much is reality or how much is in her head. And then, eventually it winds up being that I'm pretty sure like almost this whole sequence, like her in rehab, is all just in her head fabricated. I'm pretty sure, because a lot of it, if you kind of treat it as a literal, doesn't really make much sense. Like, of course, you get the reveal of Gemma not actually being there. You get this whole kind of convoluted plot of her trying to overdose in a Pizza Hut freezer, and a guy coming in to, resuscitate her after she dies, because hopefully by her dying, it'll, the entity will pass on to somebody else. And, it's like a horror movie trope, like for, it's the It Follows and luring the entity to the pool. It's, I mentioned a couple of other movies in the opening, but it's the sort of thing where it's like, I don't really like this, but we kind of have to do it.
Yeah.
You need your protagonist to be active and try and get rid of the entity. They can't just be like plagued by it the entire movie. And for a lot of this sequence, even though like conceptually it's a little bit silly what they were doing, I thought once again the horror was just really effective. Like her being on her back and, getting injected and seeing like the version of herself from a year ago when she was all drugged out and like in the car accident, the blood dripping on her, and then essentially like the very literal like fighting with herself. I just thought all this shit worked. Like, once again, like what is trying to be accomplished in terms of the plot in that scene is kind of silly. And, and of course it's revealed that it's, likely didn't happen. But it was the sort of thing that in the moment, I just very much liked it, like thematically what was going on, and then the merging with the horror and, ultimately what it leads to, which is this ending, which I think everybody would expect this to be the ending going into the movie. Is this how you expected the movie to end?
Yeah.
Like this?
100%.
Okay.
100%. Yeah. I knew like pretty much at the beginning when I'm like, oh, we're talking about a concert. We've made sure to reiterate that, whoever you kill yourself in front of, like, gets imprinted with this entity. Yeah. So I'm like, we have to be going here. This only makes sense.
And that's the thing. I still loved it. It was the sort of thing where it was so obvious where it was going. I didn't really expect them to, like, pay, kind of have a payoff for, like, her costuming earlier in the movie where she didn't like it because it was a little bit too sheer, where you can see her stitches from the accident. But, like, in the finale, she uses that, like, stitching to rip apart and the entity comes out, like, from the first one with all the smiles and stuff. Visual effects look pretty shitty on it, I'm not gonna lie. But, like, once again, it was just such a cool moment that I was just on board for it, that I was just like, oh yeah, here we go. And the fact that we don't actually see her, commit suicide, she don't perform the act, that goes back to, once again, for like the sound design and like all the shots on the crowd and everyone that sort of thing. It was just very effective. It was very well done. I think everybody going into this movie expects it to end with like, oh yeah, she's a pop star. She's obviously gonna like smile through the pain or smile at the end of the movie while she does it. And, everyone who's obsessed with her is now, has 7 days to live, I guess, with this crazy entity. But it was just so effective. I just loved it. I loved like the payoff of the stage, and her costuming and like the choreography, everything about it. It just kind of swelled to like the perfect sort of ending for this movie, even if it wasn't, even if it was just easy to predict that it was coming from a mile away.
Yeah, well, and I think, honestly, I think it leads it to a more interesting spot for a third one, which is obviously coming. Like, you're getting at least like 5 or 6 of these, like...
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure this one was still really successful, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think this made a crap ton of money, so... I mean, it was in the theater long enough, but, to me, I was just like, this is interesting. This is where they can actually really do something different with the story of, we've now had 2 movies of these people passing along. We're like following this very linear thing, but it's like, okay, but what happens when like thousands of people all at once have this entity? And I'm kind of excited to explore that.
Yeah, me as well. I think it's a concept that can definitely go wrong.
Oh yeah,
it could literally turn into like The Happening from M. Night Shyamalan, where everyone's killing themselves around the world. Or who knows? Maybe they'll find a way to make it more interesting with almost like AA meetings of people, like, of those that they've lost, and, I don't know. They gotta find a more interesting angle than just, following like half a dozen people as they killed themselves over the course of 7 days.
Yeah.
So, but regardless, I have faith after seeing this. Like, this was a much larger movie than the first one, just like in the stakes, the budget, like everything to do with it was just a lot more complicated. So, I have faith in Parker Finn that he'll be able to pull it off for the next one if, they do choose to do a Smile 3. And with that, anything else we got to say before we rate this?
I think we've said enough.
So if you're new to the podcast, our review rubric is nay, okay, yay, or slay. So Rowan, what would you give Smile 2?
I mean, we didn't say a whole lot bad about this, so I don't think it'd be a surprise. I'm going to come in with a yay, and like a pretty strong yay. I really, really like this. I mean, did it have its faults? Of course it did, and, we brought them up with some of the lore stuff. You talked about, her having to kill herself, resuscitate herself, that whole kind of plot line. I had some issues with that, just story-wise. I was like, some of this doesn't really make sense, and, she interacted with this dead guy's brother, and that guy literally didn't smile once, but apparently was the entity, and they've already kind of set up the entities always smile at some point, or are smiling. So I was like, but you know what? Like I said, everything was so strong around it that it kind of held that up.
I think that guy was real. It was just like when she texted him to like set up the third act. I don't think that whole part was real. I think when she met up with him and he had this convoluted plan, I think that was legit. It was just
they never actually. Okay. Yeah. That makes a little more sense. But yeah, I mean, even with that, I got confused by that. So, but like I said, there's so much of this that was really strong. And even if I jumped at cheap jump scares, like I said, I normally don't, which I was like, that instantly made me have a good time. And let me tell you, I found out pretty quickly, there's like no cool way to kind of end jumping from a jump scare in a theater with people in it. You look like a loser either way. You try to like play it off, like, oh, jump. Oh, I'm not really jumping. I'm just trying to have a drink of my drink. I just moved all of a sudden. You can't do it. It's not possible. People know. They're on to me. And I have to live with that. But yeah, for the movie, it's definitely a very strong yay. I really, really enjoyed myself. And now that I've reflected on the first one, the second one, like this might be one of my favorite kind of like mainstream, popcorn franchises in horror right now. Is it better than Night Swim? Probably not. But, you can't beat the Blumhouse haunted object universe. So, behind that, but it is great. Go see it. I can't say it enough. Good. See it in streaming. I'll be buying it when it comes out on 4K. I will definitely have to have this in the collection. What about you, Colton? What would you rate it?
Yeah, I'm on the same page. For me, this one's a strong yay as well. It was the sort of thing with, if it was a little bit shorter, it kind of wasn't quite as silly or hand wavy, I guess, in the third act of like some of the things that happened. I think it just kind of gets a little bit too cute with, the twists and turns and how it all kind of culminates, even though I do like where it ultimately ends. It's just it's a little bit confusing, and it's just kind of, some of it's unnecessary. But I mean, at the end of the day, like Naomi Scott's performance just, holds the whole thing together. The style, just in basically every single aspect, in my opinion, is a huge step up from the first. And then the movie itself is just far better, far more successful as a horror movie for me than the first one. So yeah, it's going to be a strong yay from me. With Smile 3, let's just, shave off 15 minutes or so, and then we'll be in good hands. You know who else loves Smile? Mormon missionaries knocking at your front door. Rowan, were you looking forward to Heretic?
Great transition.
Thank you.
I was kind of. I didn't really know what to expect. Unlike Smile 2, which I had to see, 8 ads every YouTube video I ever watched for months. Heretic, a little less so.
Oh, interesting. It was the opposite for me. I saw a lot of trailers for Heretic.
Yeah, I think I only saw the trailer like twice, maybe. It might not even been twice, maybe just once. Wow. So I didn't really know what to expect, and I did a good job. Like, obviously, this came out last week, and I just kind of avoided anything about it, listening to anyone talk about it. But I'm always interested in Hugh Grant and his later career. I kind of enjoyed that, this guy that's gone from this like romantic leading man, just like rock star celebrity, in his later career now is just picking weird roles in like random movies and hopefully living his best life, cashing checks. So I love, and obviously we're excited, an A24 movie, but I love when we get like an actor that's doing something they don't normally do, and being crazy. So I was just very, very interested in what this possibly could be. What about yourself? Excited?
Oh, yeah. This was one that I was very much looking forward to as well. Obviously, it's an A24 movie. Basically, I'm excited for every single one of those. But more so, I saw the trailer for this one quite a lot throughout the summer. And for whatever reason, it wasn't one that I just avoided. I think maybe just one time I accidentally sat through it and I was like, well, I can't undo that. I've seen it now. But obviously, religious A24 horror movies is sort of my bag. But also, Hugh Grant, I've also loved this late stage career pivot where essentially he's taken all these villainous roles. Like obviously there was Paddington 2, which God, he's amazing in Paddington 2. But also like I think more recently Dungeons and Dragons. I'm pretty sure he was like the main villain in that one.
Yeah.
And then obviously in Heretic, it's not a spoiler to say that he's definitely giving this villainous portrayal in this movie. Also, I really like The Quiet Place, which I think is like becoming more and more like less cool to say. And the directors of this movie, they wrote and directed this, but they also wrote A Quiet Place. And for whatever reason, that's a movie that just still very much resonates with me. It is still one that every single time I watch, I pick more and more holes in it. So eventually it'll probably be like, that's an okay movie. But for now, A Quiet Place, when you say, hey, this is written by the people who did A Quiet Place, that, that means something for me. And it was also just one of my most anticipated movies of TIFF this year. Obviously I go to TIFF every single year. And I was lucky enough to check this out at the festival a couple of months ago. So yeah, it was very much something that I was heavily anticipating going into the festival, heard a couple of reactions from the world premiere, and I was like, good, I have tickets the next day. And it happened to have the whole cast and Hugh Grant and everyone in attendance. So it was great. And, I did the whole Q&A and whatnot. But yeah, it's the sort of thing where I was very much looking forward to it. It's been a couple of months since I've seen it, so we might have to rely on you to kind of jog my memory. But, suffice it to say, I was very much looking forward to Heretic. So will we continue to worship at the altar of A24? Well, before we get into that, let's take a listen to the trailer.
Mr. Reed, you mentioned you might be interested in learning more about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
We need to return to the church.
The door won't open. You'll have to exit through the back of my house.
So which door?
It's a simple choice. Belief or disbelief.
What happens if we choose the wrong door?
Should I request a drum roll?
We just need to go home.
We were just getting started, weren't we?
What you just heard is from Heretic, written and directed by Scott Beck and Brian Woods, and the story is as follows. Two young Mormon missionaries are forced to prove their faith when they knock on the door of a diabolical older man and become ensnared in his deadly game of cat and mouse. Now, here on Now Slang, we like to keep things relatively spoiler-free up front before moving into the more in-depth spoiler-filled discussion. So, Rowan, what are your spoiler-free thoughts on Heretic?
Just 2 words for you. Topher Grace.
Oh my God.
Topher Grace has nothing really to do with the movie. He is in it.
Is there a more unnecessary plot thread in any horror movie this year? I don't think so. I think he should not have been in this movie.
I mean, when you got Topher Grace, you gotta use Topher Grace. But yeah, no. I thought going into this blindly, I was very surprised. I didn't even remember other than Hugh Grant who's in this. So very happy to see Sophie Thatcher, because I remember us really liking The Boogeyman. We thought it was pretty good.
Oh, she was in that?
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say, I don't know if I've seen much from Sophie Thatcher or Chloe East, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, she is the main protagonist in The Boogeyman.
Okay.
who I remember when we reviewed it, we both said she is really good. I can't wait to see more stuff she's in. And I saw she's credited in Maxine. I can't really remember who she played in Maxine, but yeah, I was like, oh, it's this girl. I'm really excited to see that. And then Chloe East, I did recognize she is from The Fabelmans, and that's really the only thing I remember her from. But I thought I love the premise. Obviously, I'm kind of, as a fellow person that has an interest in kind of theology, but more in the terms of I'm a giant atheist, so I'm always interested in people's beliefs and stuff. And just why and how come. Obviously, this is tickling my happy bone where I'm like, oh, awesome. A movie that's challenging religion and by Scott Beck and Brian Woods, which made me also very happy. We've never talked about it on the main show. I don't know why I've never picked it for review, but they did Haunt.
Oh, yeah.
And which I was probably one of my favorite blind watches of the last couple of years. And I knew they were working on Haunt too, but I didn't know they were doing this. So super excited because I think they're very competent at what they do. And this one, you know what? This is a weird one. As opposed to Smile, Smile 2, where I came out of it being you know what? No wonder everyone's gonna love this. What a horror scare for everyone. I came out of this I really enjoyed this, but I feel like this is going to be pretty divisive. I don't think this is for everybody. I think a lot of the premises that are set up in it, I don't know if it's going to give you the payoff you necessarily are looking for. Mm-hmm. Because, I specifically wanted to make sure at the beginning I'd put in the word theology in this, where, I could see this movie being beloved by all of philosophy majors that are like, what am I doing with this philosophy degree? It's going to see Heretic and discussing life. Because, this is very, it's very just unique, I think. The scares are kind of untraditional to me. This is more a thriller, almost like Silence of the Lambs to me, than this is, a horror movie Smile 2 or something like that. This is literally I want to see how villainous Hugh Grant can be, but we never get to the promise I think of the trailer kind of gave us. Because I remember seeing the trailer, I'm like, oh, interesting. This is going to be some sort of maze saw kind of thing going on. Mm-hmm. And we got a hint of something in the trailer. I'm like, oh, is this vampires or some sort of beings or something? Which the movie also kind of sets you up to be oh, there's the basement. There's something in the basement. You got to go through the basement. And this isn't a spoiler because this is what they say this in the trailer, essentially. They give you the speech of the doors in the trailer. Yeah. And I just think it goes in really bizarre places. And
agreed.
And I will admit, it was one of those ones that when I drove out, it took me a little while. I was like, do I hate this movie? Or and then I'm thinking about it and I'm like, I don't know, maybe I don't. And then I'm like, no, maybe I do. And just it was just a bizarre viewing experience. I'm interested your viewing experience with it and if you had any of those feelings.
Yeah, when I was watching it, it was pretty conflicted for me because it starts out with this really cringy condom discussion for the first probably 2 minutes of the movie, and I was like, oh no, this is pretty juvenile. This isn't what I at all want with this, deliberations on religion and faith and, kind of lampooning it and criticizing it and, building up other faiths and whatnot. I was just like, oh, if they got to, start the movie with a 2-minute discussion on Magnum condoms, we're in uncharted waters. This is not good. But what I will say is that the premise that the trailer kind of sells, and very much you're here for this diabolical, this unnerving performance by Hugh Grant, and basically him monologuing about religion and kind of criticizing it and lampooning it, and talking about there only being one true religion and all this sort of thing. I thought the movie absolutely nailed that for, the 40 minutes that it's doing that. And then basically the movie changes very quickly. And it starts, developing things that I would not expect for this movie to have. And then it starts throwing out all these explanations for explaining what you saw and what happened. And then it's kind of like, oh no, that actually didn't happen. Now we're doing this. And it winds up being kind of like so confusing. And not that I couldn't like grasp the thread, but like almost confusing and like, why did you do this? That it started to like irritate me like the longer it went on. I still think a lot of like the performances and kind of what's happening and a lot of like, the framing of it and the technicals are still well done. It's just, damn, dude, I was so into like the first 40 minutes of this movie, and the last 40 minutes are nothing at all like the first 40 minutes. So it was the sort of thing where I felt like the promise of the premise wasn't delivered upon. I felt like what the movie was selling me isn't really exactly what I got. Like, when I think back to like, let's say a moment such as the Monopoly monologue, which I think will be probably one of the big moments of this movie where, it's delivering on like how religion has been kind of adopted and changed throughout the years and comparing it to different versions of Monopoly and whatnot. And I thought that was really interesting, and I haven't seen it explained in that way. To then jump 20 minutes later and what we're dealing with, it's like, well, this isn't at all what I wanted. If I was into like the first 40 minutes of this movie, I'm surprised that like, you'd be into the last half. So for me, it was the sort of thing where I agree when I was watching the movie, I was just constantly surprised with like, oh, I didn't expect it to be one of these movies, and now I'm kind of let down by it. And, obviously we're talking around some like revelations and whatnot that we'll get into the spoiler-filled discussion, but it was ultimately like a bit of a mixed bag in a way for me where I just very much enjoyed a lot of it, and then it kept losing me the longer it went on. I think consistently throughout the whole movie, Hugh Grant is just excellent, like kills it. He's absolutely like chewing up the scenery. He's laboring over every line, loving it. Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East are both great. They're kind of like dueling variations on Mormon missionaries, one that was born in the Mormon church, one that's a convert, that I thought was interesting because sometimes like the way they were raised and kind of like their thoughts outside of being a Mormon missionary kind of, play and kind of creep into like some of their rationales and explanations for the movie. Yeah, dude, it was just honestly where this movie, you said theology, where this movie is so like front loaded with kind of exploring all these concepts and, basically people that have been, raised religious and then they're skeptical of aspects themselves. They've probably had similar conversations or similar questions, or have sought out similar media that what we wind up getting in the latter half is just not at all what I wanted. I agree. I thought this movie was going to be something similar to Saw or like, a maze, a labyrinth, when you're setting up this idea of two doors, one being in like believing and non-believing or, whatever exactly it says on them. I can't remember now, but it's like, okay, there's a choice, and whether or not that leads to a different result, fine. But it kind of almost sets up this game, and even like the pitches for this movie says like a game of cat and mouse and whatnot. I'm expecting there to be some sort of hard choices that they have to make throughout the movie, maybe the trolley problem or something like that I just it didn't really deliver on what was set up. I didn't find it wound up feeling a lot more kind of just like a lot of other horror movies, like it was less special the longer it went on, is kind of how I found, I guess.
I 100% had those feelings about it. It's just one of those where I think, to me, it just seemed like they had that nugget of like this really good idea, and like you said, as they expanded on it, like the places it went, I'm just kind of like, like that, just like literally every pretty much past what you're talking about, like that first 40 minutes that I think is spectacular. Like I'm like, all right, like we're really headed somewhere good.
The suspense around these young women being like in this house with, the blueberry pie reveal, or like, how the house is reinforced with like thick metal walls so they can't get the cell service, and that kind of like lingering belief of like, oh, does he have a wife? Is he gonna bring a wife into this, picture? Is this sort of thing where it's like, it's very unnerving in a certain way. I agree that it's not like straight up horror. In those moments, it is definitely more of like a thriller, like, oh, is this guy a serial killer or something like that? But I very much liked that like predation that was happening in that beginning of the movie, where it was very much he was playing with them and, saying he was being honest, but who knows You know, and in what twisted ways, how did that honesty actually plays out?
Yeah, well, and the real issue to me with this is like, you know, if I'm listening to this episode, I'm like, oh my God, they're like telling all these things in the spoiler-free section, except literally all this stuff is in the trailer. Like the reinforced walls is in the trailer, like the blueberry candle, it's in the trailer. Like, and to me, that was one of the things that like deflates is I'm like, all the things I really like about this movie were revealed to me in the trailer that I saw.
You are kind of right, where a lot of the trailer, what's shown is probably the first 20 minutes of the movie, I would say. Which obviously there are a lot of trailers that do that. It's just for this movie, like obviously there's a lot of these little nuggets that, you know, it's taking our heroines a couple of minutes to figure out these aspects, right?
And because, like we said, it's so shaky, you know, afterwards, I'm like, okay, well, this makes sense why we really wanted the marketing to focus on this first 40 minutes, because you got a banger in the first 40 minutes. And it just kind of whimpers towards the end.
Yeah, so although it's you know, it's not quite what I expected, and you know, it's not really as sophisticated or challenging to me as a lot of other A24 horror movies, I would still recommend checking it out. I think specifically for the performances, and like once again, the first 40 minutes or so is really excellent once you get past that condom discussion that opens the movie. But it is very different than what you're sold. I wonder if you're like a typical A24 audience, if you'd enjoy this, or if it's better for someone who is just a more general audience. It's just, it goes in like places where like I just I wasn't interested in. It's like, once again, what is challenging about the first 40 minutes is that it's very, very much, it's theology, it's long discussions, it's monologues, it's, you know, it's performance and writing, it all comes together, and it's like, okay, this is a very talky movie until it's not.
Yeah.
And then it's like, I don't know who this movie is for 100%. I would recommend it, but it's not like a full-throated, you know, hearty recommendation like a Smile 2 or something. It's like, yeah, I mean, check it out, mostly for the performances more than anything. What about yourself?
Yeah, I'm 100% on that same boat. I think Hugh Grant's performance is really good. I definitely would check it out. It's worth it just for that, to see him do this kind of horror movie villain twist. And Sophia Thatcher and Chloe East, or that's her name? Yeah, Chloe East.
Yeah.
And
Topher Grace.
And Topher Grace, yeah. Do you want to see Topher Grace dressed up as a like 50-year-old I don't even know,
an elder
they
something.
Call it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Mormon elder.
I don't know what they're called in the Mormon church. I think elder something. Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to see that too, you know, definitely go see it. And like I said, when I came out of this, I also was kind of like back and forth, and I was like, I think I generally liked it. I just don't think it necessarily like hit it out of the park.
That's how I feel as well. Yeah.
So yeah, I would like lightly recommend it.
So we're both recommending Heretic. I think it's probably still playing in theaters, so if you have a chance to check it out, maybe feel free to do so. And with that, it's time to cut to the spoiler discussion for Heretic. We are now in our spoiler discussion for Heretic, so if you've not seen Heretic, it's time to tune out and come back once you've seen the movie, or keep listening if you simply don't care. Rowan, we were dancing around a lot there in that beginning section, kind of about how the movie truly changes about 40 minutes in. Is that where we want to start in our spoiler-filled discussion? Or?
Yeah, let's start there.
Witnessing a miracle, you know, this idea of resurrection, this idea of getting to the basement and there's an old lady down there who's called a prophet, and, you know, she kind of looks a little bit, you know, maybe undead or maybe just like old. It's kind of like, it's like, okay. And then, you know, she starts eating a pie full of poison to ultimately die. And I was just like, what is this movie? Where did this come from? Obviously, it's set up with the pie, of course, you know, in that regard. But it was just like not exactly what I was expecting. You know, they didn't go downstairs and it wasn't like a trap or them having to make another choice. Like, it wasn't like the kind of like Judgment of Solomon, you know, splitting like the baby in half or this sort of thing. Like the movie just got a lot more straightforward and, dare I say, like stupid. As soon as they descended down into the basement, it was just like, you know, basically the intellectual level of it just also descended. I was just kind of shocked that like we basically just became like I don't know, like any other horror movie to a certain degree. And they very much linger in this idea of like this being a prophet or like an undead person or like a paranormal event for probably the next like 15 minutes after that moment. And they lingered enough that I started to believe like that was the point of the movie, and I was kind of annoyed by it. And then once it's like, it's shown like, okay, it wasn't resurrected. There's actually another woman. I was like, okay, but then they start going into like simulation theory about how we're living in like a simulation and inside a computer and all this stuff. And I was just like, bro, this movie is losing me fast. It was just like, it was very, very different.
I was kind of thinking, and I don't really know what they were trying to get at. I'll tell you how I felt. I felt, is this some sort of weird commentary of just like kind of this like Elon Muskification of things, of like, because I was like, I do kind of like this twist of, we kind of get this very, like you said, in this first 40 minutes is very kind of like highbrow theology. Like, it's like an actual intellectual conversation about,
yeah, it's not like a master's course or something, but it's probably a university level theology course,
And then this kind of twist is where like, oh, wait, actually, this guy just has like this really stupid idea. And, it's just like, to me, I could envision, I'm like, oh yeah, this is like what like some Twitter ex-bro are like typing about, like, we're in a simulation. I mean, it's very famously the last year or two, like, Andrew Tate has been on this really hard.
Yeah, the Matrix. We gotta fight back against the Matrix.
So, I mean, to me, I'm gonna kind of, just from what I know of them, I have heard interviews with them about Haunt and like other stuff, and leading up to this a bit, and they're very politically aware, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if this is kind of a pushback of like, these men that think that they're really, really like brilliant, have these brilliant like concepts, are not really. They're just kind of, sick individuals and psychos. But like you said, to me, I was just kind of expecting, I don't know, is it unfair of us to expect from A24 of like, just kind of like this heightened, maybe a little more intellectual throughout the whole movie, where it kind of came down in this twist that I was like, this is just kind of, I don't know, like, it felt like a VOD horror movie twist. I'm like, this is something I just see in a random DVD I picked up at Walmart or something.
Yeah, it was a sort of twist that was just like, yeah, that would be on like almost any horror movie. Oh, there's a monster in the basement. Like, quite, to me, realistically, what it reminded me of was Barbarian, which obviously in a lot of ways Barbarian is clever, but like it was the sort of thing where it was like, we descend into the basement, and what is there? An old woman who kind of looks a bit gross. It's like okay, I've seen Barbarian, it's just like I to me it was just like not at all what I expected. I wanted Saw, and I got like bad Barbarian in a sort of way. Like that's what it was being pitched as, like kind of she's this prophet, this like immortal being, this this one that's like tormented and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, they're really building up this like paranormal aspect of like this entity or this being, or like, oh, it's a possessed woman or something like that. And then it winds up just being like, oh, never mind, it's just I have a room that has 6 to 8 women in there at all times, and they just obey me because I have power over them, and they gave me the power over them. And I was just like, okay, fine. Like, I don't know. I just kind of sighed. It wasn't like a cool reveal or anything to me. I was just like, okay, sure.
Yeah, well, and it's like I said, it's just like, it seemed like the kind of the thought process of that reveal of like the room with the women is like, I kind of left being like, I don't think this is like as revealing or smart as you think it is. Like, yeah, okay, religion controls people. Like, this is a pretty basic concept that like a lot of movies tackle probably better.
The idea of this one true God being power, it was just kind of like, yeah, I've been learning that since, I don't know, probably like grade 9, English, it's like, absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's like, yeah, of course, that's like kind of like the obvious way you'd go with this movie. But similarly, so like when you're making this idea of like power is the idea of this movie, there isn't even enough like changing power dynamics between like him and then the two Mormon missionaries.
Yeah.
Or kind of like he is not controlling them well enough that I feel like this was all like this game that was meticulously planned. It seems like a lot of the time he's actually just fumbling for explanation through this movie after the first 40 minutes, which maybe that's like, you want to see somebody like this turn it be a little bit like bumbling idiot, or like, oh, he's coming up with the simulation theory on the fly because she has an IUD or whatever. It's just like, okay, but like it's just dumb. It just becomes dumb, and that's upsetting because I didn't think the movie was dumb for like 40 to 50 minutes, and then it's just like it becomes almost like just any other horror movie to a certain regard, other than maybe having the one wrinkle that, you know, Sophie Thatcher is essentially killed, you know, pretty quickly once you go down into that basement, which, you know, it was surprising. I didn't expect that to happen in that moment. And I was like, oh, cool. It's like for the first half of the movie, it seemed like more so, like, obviously they're both there, but she felt like more of like the edgy character that was kind of leading some more of like the probing in the discussions. I felt like the camera favored her a little bit more than Chloe East. And then obviously it's very much, you know, Chloe East versus Hugh Grant for the last half of the movie, basically. That I thought was, okay, that was a little bit interesting, I guess.
Yeah, well, and this is where, like, so much of this, like, premise I'm, like, confused on because, yeah, it did surprise me, too, because obviously you just kind of assume, you're like, okay, well, Sister Paxton's gonna die. Like, we're kind of introduced, like, you know, she's, like you said, like, raised in the church. She's, like, very sheltered, like, curious, but, like, never, like, really questioning her religion. And, you know, so I'm like, okay, like, so we're gonna get into this and these conversations. But then, like, even though there's this thread of, like, religion, like, power is, you know, is religion using power, I'm like, we still kind of also end in the fact that, like, her faith is just still there. And it's like, no, you know what? Like, you know, the character that had the faith kind of lasted the longest, solved the mystery, and then, you know, just kind of ends it with like a good old prayer. And, you know, after stabbing him or whatever. And,
well, you know, the Mormon underwear code word payoff, of course, you know, in that third act, where Sophie Thatcher isn't actually dead, and we actually got to witness a resurrection sort of thing where it's like, was it a true resurrection, or was she just, you know, not bled out all the way? I guess that's one little clever
it's for you to wonder.
Joke.
I mean, like you said, with this film, obviously the Monopoly speech is gonna be like the one that it's really great. You know, great use of the Hollies, the air that I breathe, and you know, obviously,
yeah, that was really good as well. Yeah,
millennials going crazy. They got Lana Del Rey mentioned in this. Yeah. But, you know, I loved all that. And it was awesome because obviously the fact that this rant about, you know, the air that I breathe to Creep to Lana Del Rey, like, being given by psychotic Hugh Grant just makes it that much better. And, you know, like, stuff like that, I'm like, this is awesome. This is like, you know, because it's out there. It's like, it's kind of funny, but it's still like, you can tell he's psychotic and stuff. And like you said, it's just, the real issue is that flip in the second half where he's crazy, but to me, he's just more generic crazy. More like, oh, I'm a crazy, you know, serial killer. More so than, like, you know, when he's giving this Monopoly speech, you know, you're confused. You're like, this guy's unhinged. What's going on? There's just like all the air is deflated out of this at the end. And I think it's interesting because, you know, I talked about it being this like VOD twist. But then, like, when I think about something as much, like, I love Haunt. And it's like, you know, people that would watch Haunt would be like, well, Haunt is like a pretty, you know, straight up, like, you know, you go into a haunted house, people are murdering you type thing. But to me, it's like, yeah, but that was the premise of it. Like, they weren't they weren't teasing you with like this intellectual conversation going on in the film. Haunt was like, you know what? This could be like a VOD trash movie. You're going in, you're going to see some teenagers die and brutally, and then that's the fun of it. Where, yeah, I just think they promised the moon and they could only give us like, Ontario. That's about it.
Yeah, and what's kind of sad is just I do think if they just thought about like the religious aspects a little bit more, they could have had some sort of fun Saw game based in theology, religion, making hard choices, maybe having to sacrifice the other one, or sort of ideas. They could have toyed with it a lot more, but instead they just do this whole weird thing with like leading you on for probably 20 minutes that we're watching like this paranormal creature sort of thing that's going to be revived. And it's just like, once again, this idea of having like this prophet that's going to die and be resurrected. That sort of concept has been in other A24 movies. It's more about how this one was packaged and then sold to us, that it was just like, it wasn't really a subversion of what I wanted. Like, or I guess technically it's a subversion, but it's just literally, it was just disappointing. It wasn't what I wanted at all. And then, ultimately the movie ending with like, oh, was she reincarnated as a butterfly and, all this sort of stuff. I was just like, bro, I'm out. I'm good. It was just, I don't know. It's weird. I enjoyed so much of it.
Yeah.
And then it was just like, it just kind of lost me quite a bit in the last half. But I don't know if it lost me enough to be negative on it. It was just, I don't know. It's a strange movie. I think it's one when I rewatch it, there's a chance that I very much dislike this on a rewatch.
Yeah. Now, my real question, kind of my final question for it is, do you think it's better if she gets to the area where the women are like locked up in the cages, but instead of like cutting their fingers and off, they're in cages and they're just forced to watch videotape after videotape of VeggieTales, and that he's just indoctrinating them.
Wow. No comment on that one, Rowan. No comment. But if you're new to the podcast, our review rubric is nay, okay, yay, or slay. So, Rowan, what would you give Heretic?
This is a hard one. This is like a hard one to rate. Yeah. It's been a long time. I think I have to give it an okay because of my feelings towards it. Like, if it was the first 40 minutes, it would be like a yay. It would be a very strong yay. I really, really liked it, but it's just, it gets deflated so quick, and it's just like kind of depressing how quickly this movie turns after that I'm like, oh, I don't really care about anything that's going on right now, and I've just totally lost interest in this whatsoever. And we brought up briefly, but not even like overly, the fact that like, after those 40 minutes, like the idea of escape is almost just an afterthought in this. Like, so you kind of lose the fun of like trying to escape this place.
Are they gonna get out? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I'd give it like a strong okay. Like, I mean, I think Hugh Grant's performance alone is really well done and worth seeing. I think it's gonna be a good time. Like you, I'm very interested to see it again, just because I'd be interested on a second view after some time, whether or not that all holds up at the beginning and I still feel the same about it. And if I'm as negative on the ending as I am now, I'm curious, like now that my expectations were lowered after seeing it, if I go in kind of knowing what I'm getting into, would I enjoy it a little bit more? So I think, I'm going to have to give it an okay. What about you?
This is challenging for me because it's the sort of thing where when I watched it at the festival, I gave it a positive review, 3.5, not glowing, but obviously I felt like it was still good, but that was months ago now.
Yeah.
Right. And the only things that are like left in my head are Hugh Grant's performance and, obviously the other girls as well, but Hugh Grant is the star of this and he's, basically just amazing in the movie. And then just disappointment. This is the other aspect that's left in my head. And I'm kind of trying to like figure out if it's due to the movie actually being disappointing or just due to what I was expecting from the movie. Is it because I wanted Saw by way of like, biblical themed games or like, not necessarily like the pound of flesh aspect of Saw with gore, but like just basically having to make choices that have a cost and then being kind of like themed around like theology, I think is way more interesting than ultimately what we got. I don't know. I think I'll lean the other way and I'll give it a very weak yay.
Okay.
I am the sort of thing where I do think it's probably just Hugh Grant that gets it there for me.
Yeah.
I think if he was a little bit weaker, this would be an easy okay, but I think he's so excellent in the movie. And once again, the first probably 40 minutes of it is like literally like a great movie outside of the condom discussion. But like the rest of it is like great movie. That it's like it probably just gets there for me. But yeah, it's not like a glowing endorsement or anything. And as I've already said, I think it's the sort of thing when I rewatch this, I think I'd probably go the other way. I think I'll be like probably annoyed or picking apart some of that latter half a little bit more rather than just kind of like confused and like, oh, are they really going this way? You know? So I don't know. It's still it's a conflicted yay for me. I don't know. It's the sort of one where I give it a yay now and in 2 days I'd be like, oh, should have gave that an okay. But I'll settle on a yay for now. And if you're not following us on our socials already, you can do so at It Slays Podcast. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Slasher, Letterboxd, Threads, Bluesky. If there's a social media, we're probably there at It Slays Podcast. And if you want to help support the show financially, like our horror hounds, Holly, Nicholas, Patrick, Mark, Stephen, Joy, Dan, Brian, Trevor, and James, gain access to the Patreon exclusive show Stream Screams and get episodes of the main show 48 hours early. Be sure to head on over to patreon.com/itslayspodcast and choose whatever tier works best for you. Rowan, is Lana Del Rey making the playlist?
I don't know. I feel like if they got a good, I do like they do the Jordan Peele effect to the Holly song. I was like, if they've got that up, that could definitely go on the creepified version of it. But I mean, you can go to Spotify to the It Slays Podcast Horrific playlist. If you have any problems finding it on there, you can go to any of the social media that Colton just mentioned, click on the Linktree link in the bio, and it'll take you directly there. We upload scores and licensed music to iconic horror movies we review, or just horror movies we love. So follow that, get your spooky music on, because why the hell not? And then I'll just add on the end there, which I don't think, we're getting some people, but not everybody knows. It Slays Podcast, also on TikTok now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, nothing special yet, just some audiograms, some promotional stuff.
Okay. If we ever go video, it'll do numbers. It'll go huge.
I'm trying to, behind the scenes, we're planning stuff out. But for right now, just some promo on there. That way you can kind of hear funny parts, episodes, or, just stuff we're talking about in the episode, and it'll give you a link to do it. Also, a good way to check out the Patreon episode. So, yeah.
Nice. And next time on the show, I looked at my document, and basically I had kind of nothing left for this year. We missed, I don't know, easily half a dozen horror releases over the course of October and, September when I was working and you guys were slacking, I guess. But,
I almost wondered if it would be fun to do an end of the year we missed this now.
We missed all these. Let's quickly cover all these in 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't know. Let's flirt with that idea because we definitely had a few different movies that we were planning to review and then just couldn't make it work for scheduling. So well, we'll think about it. Maybe we'll do something like that. If not, the next big horror release I have, and this might not be it, is Nosferatu. I don't know. There might be something else before then, but that's a month away now.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, definitely checking that out. That's my Christmas Day plans here. So
that's right. Everyone should spend the holidays.
Absolutely. And with that, I think that about wraps things up for this episode. So until next time, I'm Colton.
I'm Rowan.
And as long as you keep listening, we'll keep slaying.